Welcome back, viewer, to Road to Gojira, the series where we go through the numerous monster films that lead into the first Godzilla movie. Last we left, we got through the small stack of videos going over the original King Kong. This time around, we're going to be looking into its sequel, The Son of Kong. Now, when I reviewed the first King Kong, I briefly said that, what is there to say about the original movie that hasn't already been said due to the overwhelming popularity of the picture that has garnered numerous reviews in its lifetime. I can't really say that about the sequel though, because surprisingly, not many people are aware that this film exists. It's probably gotten a little more exposure lately because of the most recent MonsterVerse movie, because of a rumor that the next installment in that series was to be titled Son of Kong. Following that, many people weren't very fond of it because it wasn't a Godzilla film. However, fans rejoiced when Legendary revealed that it in fact was another Godzilla movie. Yeah. In terms of motivating audiences, RKO Pictures aimed to achieve the same in 1933 with a follow-up to their successful film, King Kong. Merian Cooper, who had taken over as head of production after David O. Selznick's departure, came up with the concept. Now, a sequel to King Kong would be a sensible profit opportunity. The first movie was a huge success that earned the company a lot of money, so why not benefit from it? While a good idea at the time, it did bring with itself a few complications. To begin with, how would you adapt a sequel to King Kong if Kong had met his end in the first film? Say that he survived the fall? No, that approach would entirely undermine the Beauty and Beast motif that the first movie effectively developed. Saying it was Beauty that nearly killed the Beast doesn't sound as dramatically impactful. So if they couldn't get King Kong back, then how about seeing a different Kong? The final result would bring us Kong's child. RKO did approve of this concept, but here's where the second issue arises. Despite their support, they're only contributing $250,000 towards its production, roughly half of what was allocated for the first movie, and wanted the film to be out by December of that year, meaning they had less than 10 months to get the movie finished. Given that King Kong took much longer to put together, you'd think Cooper would try to tell the higher-ups for a more reasonable schedule and budget. Surprisingly, unlike the previous film, Cooper really didn't push back too much for this one. Sure, he now had more obligations than he did before. I mean, he had 10 other movies to oversee at the time on top of the King Kong sequel. But given that this is a follow-up to his critically acclaimed movie, you'd think he'd put up a stronger fight to make it as good as the first. In truth, Son of Kong was made purely for financial gain, as opposed to King Kong, which was created as a passion project. This is evident when you watch the sequel and contrast it with its predecessor. And we'll go into all of that as we dive into the review. Most of the people who worked on King Kong came back to work on the sequel. Ruth Rose, the final screenwriter for King Kong, was among those who returned. Given the film's time and financial limits, both Rose and Cooper knew that they couldn't outperform the previous movie given their limitations. It would be production suicide to attempt such a feat. So it was ultimately decided to make a more comedy-focused sequel, one that didn't revolve too heavily around the creatures, with Rose even stating,
"If you can't make it bigger, you make it funnier."
Almost everyone supported this approach for the follow-up, with the exception of Willis O'Brien, who regretted that a pseudo-comedy had to be the follow-up to the renowned King Kong. But as we'll see, the concept alone would be the least of his worries. Due to his new position at RKO, Merian Cooper was no longer able to co-direct, so Ernest Schoedsack had to take full responsibility as the film's director. Despite the tight deadline, the production was completed in October of 1933 and debuted in US cinemas the following December under the title The Son of Kong. The plot picks up 1 month after King Kong's rampage in New York City. Carl Denham is now fleeing from the Big Apple, as many people want to assume for all the devastation caused by his monster, on top of soon being indicted. He sneaks out of the city and travels with Captain Englehorn, who we find out is also being sued. The two men gather a small crew to do some cargo business to earn a decent living across the sea. They soon arrive in Dekang and meet a man named Hellstrom, who tells Denham about a hidden treasure on the island Kong was on, convincing the once film producer to return to the island he nearly lost his life on to financially save himself. Oh, and Kong's son's a part of the story too. Despite missing much of what made the previous picture so outstanding, many people still enjoy Son of Kong. but it may surprise you to learn that they like the story up until it gets to the monster scenes, which really took me back considering it's usually the other way around. While King Kong was more centered on thrills and suspense, Son of Kong is far more character focused. Ann Darrow and Jack Driscoll don't return for this story. They're not even so much as mentioned. Carl Denham is now the main focus this time around. Since the first movie, his character has undergone a significant transformation, going from an over-the-top thrill seeker who fights to get what he wants, to a man down on his luck who feels regret for what he did to Kong and those he harmed, realizing that his selfish actions has cost him everything and then some. Despite the character change, Denham remains my favorite of the cast from the previous movie. I still enjoy him a lot in this one, even more so with his actions coming off as meaningful rather than spiteful. Denham this time around is just trying to keep his chin up and get back on his toes, maintaining his optimism through and through, despite the situations he finds himself in. Denham is once again played by actor Robert Armstrong, who once again does an outstanding job in the role. In fact, the actor has even gone on to say that he enjoyed playing Denham more in the sequel because of how the movie further develops the character, and as a plus, gives him a love interest. Now, I'll admit that I'm not a huge fan of romance, it's just not my genre, but I can acknowledge that Denham and his partner have a nice developing relationship throughout the story that is rather endearing. Speaking of her, let's go over Denham's romantic interest. What was her name again? La Belle Helene, I think they said, which translates as the beautiful Helen. So does that mean her name is Helen? Oh, I apologize, her name is Hilda. However, if you missed that one brief on-screen credit at the beginning of the film, you're probably never going to recall that she goes by Hilda because other than that credit, she is never referred to by that name during the whole film. She's only ever referred to by her stage name for a while, then the rest of the story Denham refers to her as Kid, which is particularly disturbing given that they're supposed to be romantically involved. Anyway, Hilda is not as memorable as Ann Darrow was in King Kong, but that doesn't mean she's forgettable. In fact, in many ways, I like her better than Ann. I've already stated in earlier videos that Ann Darrow is little more than a plot device with a lovely face, who consistently has to be saved all the time. In fact, that's how we're introduced to her. Hilda's introduction may not be any better, however she's a much tougher gal than I think people give her credit for. Hilda is a much more proactive character, almost always participating to get into the action, like saving the animals from the fire, grabbing her belongings from the blaze, standing up to the villain every chance she can, and even sneaking aboard Denham's ship to travel with him. She even gets the idea to save little Kong from quicksand, which was a huge benefit in the long run. A small criticism I do have is that Hilda, or rather her actress Helen Mack, occasionally speaks in certain parts while appearing to be staring off into space. Like, hello Hilda, are you still among the living here? Aside from that, Hilda is a wonderful character. It's just a shame her performance is so overshadowed by Ann Darrow and her mighty screams. Speaking of which, the two screams Hilda lets out in the movie aren't even from her actress. Instead, they're recycled screams from Ray from the first movie. The sequel may not have Ray, but it at least carries over her vocal cords. I mean, she is the original Scream Queen for a reason. The final character I want to discuss is Niles Hellstrom, the movie's villain. While this would be Hellstrom's first on-screen appearance, he was briefly mentioned in the first King Kong story, as the Norwegian skipper who sold Denham the map to Kong's island. Denham also mentions that he is a longtime friend of his, but you wouldn't get that by watching this movie, as Hellstrom acts deviously around Denham and even lies to him just to get aboard his ship. Despite his role as the antagonist, Hellstrom isn't very good. And I don't mean that in the sense that he is pure evil. No, I mean as far as movie villains go, he's quite pathetic. Not only is he very forgettable, but he's unable to maintain an intimidating demeanor throughout the story. He does murder someone, which is not to be undermined, but the person he ends up killing is a drunken old man. Way to show your dominance there. He's even the only character who runs away like a coward when he sees little Kong. Oh yeah, little Kong. I haven't really discussed him or his part in the narrative much up until this point, and that's for good reason. He's not important to the story. Yeah, surprisingly for a movie titled The Son of Kong, the plot really has nothing to do with the titular character. The narrative is about Carl Denham and Captain Englehorn to an extent, whom have suffered a significant loss in their finances and are soon about to lose their freedom. So they both embark on a journey to assist in paying off their debts, following a fortuitous meeting with a man who knows the whereabouts of immense riches. That is the story. The story is not about Denham searching for Kong's offspring. Aside from a brief joke Charlie makes at the start, nobody even knows Kong is a father. The story itself makes no mention of it up until we finally see little Kong, which is more than halfway through the movie. He literally just comes out of nowhere. By that point, you're probably saying to yourself, "Oh yeah, there's supposed to be a little Kong in this film." Now don't get me wrong, I like Little Kong, but most of his moments seem to impede the plot rather than advance it, and the little moments that do matter could have been changed to occur differently in the screenplay. Now let's take a quick look at what made King Kong work. Right from the opening act, the plot hints at something amazing. With Carl Denham going on a voyage to uncharted territory and needing a larger crew than what he normally has, and stockpiling on high-maintenance weapons for the trip. Throughout the journey, we get more hints about this being known as Kong, and there's so much build up to him that when he finally does show up, it far from disappoints. From there on out, the story centers on Kong himself. All the actions are caused because of him, right to the final moment of the movie. The sequel lacks the same build up and narrative threads that would allow Little Kong to play a larger role in the story. It's primarily why many people love the movie until the Skull Island scenes, where the monster action literally halts the story's progression. But wait, paper fins, Little Kong saved Denham and Hilda from a huge bear and a dragon thing. Surely that means something. Well, no, it doesn't. The battle scenes are so insignificant to the plot that you can remove them altogether and not know you missed anything. Sure, the characters bandaged up Little Kong's hand after the bear fight, giving young Kong a cause to appreciate them, right? We already knew that when they saved him from the quicksand. The monster fight adds weight to that a bit, but it doesn't offer us anything new. We already knew he liked them. Now, despite my criticism to his role in the story, or lack thereof, Little Kong is a charmingly great monster. I adore how innocent he is in comparison to his father, and how willing he is to support the characters on their quest, even risking his own life to help them, which sadly comes to an end when he has to save Denham at the end of the movie. But of course, the character's mere existence raises a question that I'm sure everyone asked themselves when they watched this movie. If there's a Papa Kong and a Baby Kong, shouldn't there be a Mama Kong? I can even clarify this, because upon rewatching this movie to refresh myself with the material, I sat down with both my girlfriend and her grandmother, who both knew about the original King Kong, but had no idea there was a sequel associated with it. After seeing just the title screen alone, they both wondered if there was a Queen Kong. While the concept of a female Kong and even a Queen Kong would later develop for future stories, neither is relevant to this one. Though the film wisely never addresses the question, it does make you wonder if a female Kong ever roamed the island. I frequently hear theories suggesting that the small Kong we see in this movie might not even be the descendant of the Kong that we saw in the preceding picture. Although such a theory is plausible, the narrative invalidates it entirely. Carl Denham frequently makes the point that the creature's father is King Kong. Furthermore, the movie's title itself refutes the theory, as Kong does not refer to a race as a whole, but rather to a particular monster. Yes, I'm aware that matters in other storylines, but it has nothing to do with this one, where Kong is just a singular being. Come to think of it, the character also somewhat subverts the entire Beauty and Beast theme. I mean, think about it. If Kong already had a family, then why was he trying to fall in love with female humans? If you recall, the natives on the island were trying to give Kong brides, and he eventually found one in Andero. So I suppose that means Kong just decided to abandon his family to go play with human women. Well, that's a fantastic way for remembering one of the most beloved movie monsters I praised so hard in the last video. King Kong, a self-centered, womanizing deadbeat dad. And I should bring this up now because, if I don't, it will most likely end up all over the comments section. While I've been referring to the creature as Little Kong, it turns out the character has a name, Kiko. Of course, if you only watch the movie, you never know that because the creature is never referred to by that name. The characters in the movie just call him Little Kong. Apparently the name Kiko was used by the production staff of the film, which somehow became the official name for the beast. Or maybe it's unofficial, I don't know. And while it's never been confirmed, the name Kiko seems to have been conjured up by his father's name. Just take the first two initials of King and Kong, combine them together, and you get Kiko. A shame the characters don't use it in the movie because it's rather catchy. Overall, Son of Kong is not a bad movie by any means. As far as effects go, it's still a masterpiece for its time. I wouldn't say the effects are better than the first movie, but they're not bad. I failed to mention in my previous videos about an effect called miniature rear screen projection, which is utilized both here and in King Kong. This is a method of putting a very small rear projection screen onto a miniature set. The actors would perform their actions, which was then played back, and then the footage would be projected onto the small screen. Each frame would be back projected to match the puppet's movements. This is the trick that allowed the actors to interact with the giant creatures, which in reality were just small puppets. Funny enough, the only material the staff could use at the time that could properly project the image were rubbers. Yes, the King Kong team went through a large supply of condoms to use as the miniature screens for their sets. Marcel Delgado returns to create the beasts of Skull Island with the same mold and armature process that he used in King Kong. To share some fun facts, a lot of the models from King Kong are, shockingly enough, still around today. Naturally, with time, a lot of the skin on these models has now degraded to the point that many of them are now reduced to just their skeletons. If you're wondering if King Kong's armatures are still around, then you'd be right. Though both the armatures are missing their skin. Sadly, that's been the case as early as the making of Son of Kong. To reduce costs for creating a new armature, the King Kong figurines were reduced to their metal skeletons and reskinned to create Little Kong. Like his father before him, the ape was made to be covered in rabbit fur that was for some reason dyed white, giving the creature an albino appearance. Another thing done was to shorten the length of the fur to prevent the random hair movement that Kong experienced in his film. The other creatures are much less prevalent and get even less screen time this go around. Given that the two Kong films were produced so close to one another, you could assume that many of the models from the first King Kong movie could be used in the sequel, because it hadn't been that long and the models should still function. And you'd be right to believe that, as many of the dinosaur models from the previous film were meant to return for this one. However, and I know I sound like a broken record for saying this, the production's time and budget unfortunately hampered the film's story significantly. You see, there was originally supposed to be a lot more dinosaur scenes than what we ended up getting for this movie. For example, when the characters make it to the island, they were supposed to come across the natives' village, now overtaken with dinosaurs, as a result of Kong bashing open the gate from the previous movie, which I think would have been a very iconic moment for this film. As a result of the creatures not being as present as they were before, the island just feels so empty in contrast. The Gustave Doré influences also had to be dropped, losing a great deal of that idyllic feel that the island once possessed. Skull Island as a whole just looks so much duller this time around. To quote Mike from many years into the future, Skull Island is now not so great island.
You know what they should have called this place? Not Great Island.
The natives themselves barely appear in the movie either. However, they appear to have been intended to play a larger role in the plot, as most of the advertising depicts them fighting with the humans and Little Kong. Whatever plot that was intended to be, I guess we'll never know. As I mentioned before, Willis O'Brien was not too keen with the premise of the film, but was willing to work just as hard as he did with King Kong. He had certain ideas that he wanted to incorporate into the story, like having a dinosaur stampede sequence during the island's final minutes, which would have included all the model dinosaurs created for this film, its predecessor, and even Creation. However, the producers of the movie, Schoedsack and Cooper, had shown a desire to be more involved into the effects production, forced to either reject or modify O'Brien's ideas, which O'Brien did not approve of. As a result, O'Brien about midway through gave up on the project. Not only would he stop contributing ideas, he would also stop showing up for work altogether, with his assistant from the last movie, Buzz Gibson, filling in for O'Brien to complete the animation. O'Brien didn't even want to be credited for what little work he contributed. but he was even denied that. Willis O'Brien would go on to say over the years that The Son of Kong was just a terrible work experience for him. However, the most devastating events for the animator occurred near the end of the production, when O'Brien's ex-wife committed filicide, killing both of O'Brien's kids and nearly taking her own life. O'Brien, like Kong, lost his children. It's really sad to know that right after the highest point in O'Brien's life came the most darkest point. O'Brien would eventually pick himself back up, not only to re-find happiness in a new wife, but also get back into working on films, despite what little success lied ahead. In conclusion, The Son of Kong opened favorably at the box office, but fell short of the success of its predecessor, and even received mixed reviews when it premiered. While King Kong would continue to see success upon multiple theatrical releases, The Son of Kong was a one-and-done deal, just left to time to be forgotten. Despite all that, I still recommend Son of Kong. Even if it is undoubtedly a hasty money grab, it features entertaining characters, a great opening act, and some good monster parts. To give one last bit of info, you might be surprised to know that the film premiered better in Asian territories than it did in the US. Why that is, I can't really say. But to segue from that, the next Road to Gojira episode will finally focus on Japanese films, particularly tokusatsu precursors to the first Gojira. I'm really excited for this one, as I hope you all are. So, I hope to see you all there next time.
Kiko, パパはキングコング。どこ行ったの、パパ？今、子宝でキコちゃんプレゼント。いい色だから、子宝 VR フィルム。